I'm back, and welcome back to the FITSNews Studios, another edition of the Week in Review. I'm Will Folks, the founding editor of Fits. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I especially want to thank Dylan Nolan, Jen Wood, Andy Fancher, Aaron Parrott, our entire team for the work they did holding the fort down while I was gone on vacation. Again, 8 kids at the beach. Is that really a vacation? More like relocated chaos, but hey, we brought them all back alive, so that's the bare minimum job as parents. But glad to be back at work. We've got a ton to cover this week. We're going to focus on what America's focused on, folks, the state of our republic in the aftermath of a calamitous debate performance by incumbent President Joe Biden. I'm going to sit down with Jen and Dylan. We're going to walk through what that debate means for our country and what is going to happen in this presidential race moving forward. We're also going to sit down with Andy Fancher for a big update on a criminal case that we've been following here at FITSNews, and he's going to walk you through all the very latest on that. Last but not least, Dylan and I are going to sit down and break down some progress on the issue of judicial reform. Steps we're taking this year, are they enough? We're going to walk you through what they are and whether or not this is going to make a difference in the integrity of the Palmetto State's judicial system. All that and a lot more is headed your way on the Week in Review. So obviously we're starting this show by focusing on that fraying thin thread that holds our democracy right now. It's just absolutely unprecedented in the history of the American experience, what we've been witnessing over the past few days. And so I've got a confession to make. I have watched the debate. I've watched the debate now 2 or 3 times, but as it was happening, it turns out I wasn't watching it. I didn't watch it live, and I want to tell you why. Because I was watching, like a lot of folks, something on Netflix. I was watching the show Bridgerton with my wife. Now, if you've never heard of this show before, it chronicles the aristocracy in England during the reign of George III, the king who obviously was reigning at the time America declared its independence on July 4, 1776. But there's a funny scene in the show, or one of the spin-offs of the show, where the queen to George III, Queen Charlotte, has a decision to make whether or not to jump over a wall or stay and marry King George. And I've been equating this throughout the last couple of days with the American experiment, because obviously we achieved our independence from Great Britain and effectively jumped over the wall. I'm also reminded of that West Wing line about throwing your hat over a wall so high that you have no choice but to follow your hat over the wall. But before we get into the debate, before we get into Donald Trump, before we get into Joe Biden, I wanted to bring Jen Wood, who is, by the way, politically astute, but not, a political analyst, and Dylan Nolan, who, along with me, pretend to be political analysts on television. But I wanted to bring Dylan and Jen together. But before we get into the debate, before we get into the candidates for president in this election cycle, I wanted to pose each of you a very simple question. I want to start with you, Jen. America, are you bullish or bearish?
I don't even know how to answer that. I'm going to go with bullish.
Bullish, okay. So if America's a stock right now, you're buying? Really? Okay.
I don't.
What's the rationale
I like
there?
to buy at the very bottom.
We got to get Jen on the Palmetto Political Stock Index. Okay. Well, Dylan, let's throw it to you. Bullish or bearish on America?
I agree with Jen. Buy at the bottom. We've been so mismanaged that if we just tapped into the potential that lies in this great country right now, we could be on a much better path.
All right. So you're both buying, and I'm hearing you buying low. Okay. That's an acknowledgement.
I'm not buying because of any of the leadership we saw at that debate, by the way, but I'm buying because of the fundamentals of what this country is. I'm not buying because of the executive team. I'm buying because of what the company has proven it's done in the past, if we're going to go with this stock metaphor.
Okay, fair enough. So you're saying that the fundamentals are solid for...
Correct.
Okay. Well, let's talk now a little bit about the debate. Oh, I guess I should answer the question, right? Okay, I got to admit, I'm a little bit bearish here. Stock is low. I don't know. Maybe I sold a week ago. I don't know. I'm going to say bearish. I'll be the outlier here. But let's talk a little bit about what's happened these last few days in our country. I mean, obviously, the three of us come from different parts of the country. Jen from Louisiana, Dylan from Massachusetts. I'm from here in South Carolina. We all have different ideological backgrounds and takes on things. And, we try in doing our job here at FITSNews to not let too much of that seep in, but, we don't hide from sharing our opinions here. But we also open our mic every week to those who have divergent, different even sometimes critical opinions of what we say. But let's assess what's happening in the country right now, particularly as it relates to the presidential race. Jen, I want to start with you. You watched the debate. You've been following some of the conversation in its aftermath. What was your assessment of Joe Biden's performance in that debate, Jen?
Holy cow. I was watching that with my husband and brother, who both lean quite liberal. And my jaw was on the floor. At one point, I just had to leave the room and get a beer. I was like, I don't even understand what's happening right now. It was so bad. Like, even when he walked out on the stage, I was like, oh, this is not going to go well. Like, I could tell, like, just from the walk-on. He needed
From the
a
fact
good
that he was
walk-on
speaking
song.
confusedly while he was walking out.
Oh, Lord. It was bad.
Yeah, before he got to the first question, he was already looking a little rough.
And Dylan, let me ask you, Donald Trump, how did he acquit himself during the proceedings?
I mean, if you liked Donald Trump going in, I think you thought Donald Trump did well. If you didn't like Donald Trump, you probably thought he was a lying blowhard. So I don't know that he really changed people's perception of him, but it was a great night for him because his opponent maybe literally shat the bed.
Okay, yeah, there have been some clips of potential poopage during the debate. We won't go quite into that area of it, but let me ask you guys this: the discussion, obviously, Joe Biden's comments. I mean, he said some crazy things. He wants to beat Medicaid. I mean, what the hell was that? You know, he's talking about the border, and
He said he already did beat Medicaid.
right. And talking about the border crisis, it's abundantly clear he's got absolutely no conception of maybe even where he is, let alone what the hell he's talking about. But I wanted to ask you this on the core issues that impact this country. And again, I'm looking at, we did a column just this morning. I was looking at the economy, the job situation. There was another less than stellar jobs report that came out today. That consumer price index continues to climb. Dylan, you had a report just this week about the surge in illegal aliens entering the country. Dylan, let me start with you. What if you're heading into that voting booth this fall? What's on your mind? What are the issues that are on your mind as you weigh that decision?
Well, like you said, there are those numbers that I think are going to weigh on a lot of people's minds, myself included. And it's just the fact that a lot of people go to the grocery store and they feel significantly poorer than they did 4 years ago. You go get groceries that would have previously cost you $50-$60, and it's now getting close to $200 in many instances. And that's the kind of thing that no matter how many hundreds of millions of dollars you spend on advertising is what people are going to take to the voters' booth.
Jen, what about you? You looking forward to voting this time? Seriously.
No, not
Yeah, what do you
even a
do?
little.
I mean,
I can't, I wouldn't necessarily call myself liberal. I'd say I lean left, more socially. And I don't even, if I went into a booth, I was telling Dylan, I don't even know who I'd vote for. I mean, I just don't feel like I have any good options.
But what would be the issues, like, as you try to, like, let's say it's a
Economy,
lesser.
for sure, because Dylan says, $60 is $200. Dylan has no children. I have a teenage boy like shoveling crap in his mouth nonstop. My grocery bill is insane. I mean, I went to get milk once and it was like $5 a gallon, and that kid goes through like 3 of those a week. I'm like, where is it all going?
But think
But
if you're somebody in my position where you're young and you're thinking about starting a family in the next couple of
Right.
years, this is just dejecting.
Buy,
Or I'm thinking about trying to buy a house. Okay,
Right.
well, now the mortgage rates make that very difficult.
Right. We're going to sell a house and buy a house. I'm like, God, like I want to sell this house before the economy, the market tanks, but I'm going to go buy a house. I mean, there's a lot of economics are on my mind a lot, which is very unusual that I would even consider that stuff, because those aren't things that cross my mind.
I'd just like to point out, when this show started, you were the two that are bullish here, so it's pretty amazing.
Oh, I believe in the future of this country, and I believe in my own future, but it's definitely not great days right now.
Yeah. Well, and also it should be just a little easier. They shouldn't make it such an uphill climb. And obviously, we've looked at the inflation issue. We're talking about that, obviously. And I do want to point out, FITSNews, I'm very proud of the way FITSNews has covered the inflation issue, because if you'll recall, on his way out of office in December of 2020, Donald Trump signed another massive COVID stimulus bill, which he referred to as a disgrace, then turned around and signed it. That has contributed, maybe not as much as Biden's policies, but it has contributed to the inflation. So we consistently call that out when we write about Biden inflation. We do point out that there is a Republican component to it as well. And also, if you go back over the history of this massive debt that is literally drowning this country right now, it is not just a Democratic debt. It is a debt that has been incurred by Republican presidents, Democratic presidents, Republican Congresses, and Democratic Congresses. So it has been a true example of bipartisan shit, I think is the term that gets bandied about on social media. But I want to ask you guys this. We're going to look at a couple clips here. Our would-be leaders took the occasion of July 4th to make their appeals to the electorate. And I wanted to first highlight a very patriotic video from former President Donald Trump. This was filmed on location at Mount Rushmore 4 years ago, a July 4th speech that he gave. Let's cut to this clip. This is what Donald Trump put out through his Truth Social platform this July 4th. Let's take a look.
I am here as your president to proclaim before the country and before the world, this monument will never be desecrated. These heroes will never be defaced. Their legacy will never, ever be destroyed. Their achievements will never be forgotten. And Mount Rushmore will stand forever as an eternal tribute to our forefathers and to our freedom. Those who seek to erase our heritage want Americans to forget our pride and our great dignity so that we can no longer understand ourselves or America's destiny. My fellow Americans, it is time to speak up loudly and strongly and powerfully and defend the integrity of our country. We will proclaim the ideals of the Declaration of Independence. America's future is in our hands. And ladies and gentlemen, the best is yet to come.
All right, so Dylan, you watch that, you get the Lee Greenwood vibes. What do you think watching that video?
I think that ending message is very strong because, you know, Joe Biden can't necessarily make the pitch that I'm going to do X, Y, and Z because he's had the time to do that. So Trump can pivot and say, look, these are bad days right now, but think back to what I had when I did have my hands on the economic levers.
Right. No, prior to COVID, things were going fairly well on that front. Let's pivot now. I wanted to look at this video. This was Joe Biden on July 4, a scene from the, I guess, front lawn, south lawn of the White House as he's awaiting a fireworks display. But this was at the end of a speech to some veterans. Let's take a look at as Biden goes off teleprompter.
By the way, you know, I was in that World War I cemetery in France. And the one that one of our colleagues, the former president, didn't want to go and be up there. I probably shouldn't even say it. Anyway, what I want to do, there's 7,000 people waiting at the gate to get in. So if I don't finish this, they can't come in. So maybe if you're hanging around, I'm going to sneak back out if that's okay, all right? Thank you, thank you, thank you. Remember that famous expression?
Hold on.
They also serve who only stand and wait. I remember when our son was deployed, my wife would go to stand in the sink in the morning, drinking her coffee, and saying that prayer, worrying, always concerned, and all of you. So we owe you. This could not be done without the family support. So thank you, thank you, thank you. We love you, and I really mean it from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. Thank you. You got me, man. I'm not going anywhere. All right. All right, I'll come back out when they open the gate, okay? Thank you, thank you, thank you. One last thing. You know, I used to think when I was a senator, there were always congestion on the highways. There's no congestion anymore. None. We go on the highway, there's no congestion. And so the way they get me to stop talking, they'll say, we just shut down all the roads, Mr. President. You're going to lose all the votes if you don't get in. But anyway, I'll be back out. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I love you. Thank you.
Well, I got to ask that, and I know we got to get off the politics segment here, but before we go, I don't know if you guys have seen this. We wrote on this morning. There's a big article in the Huffington Post, which is suggesting that Biden's campaign used AI to manipulate his remarks, manipulate his appearance, even manipulate his walk to make him look, I guess, less senile, more virile. Dylan, did you see this article? What do you think about it?
You know, it kind of reminds me of the advent of these new methods of warfare in Ukraine. If folks are tracking that, you'll see that one side will implement some novel techniques such as strapping grenades to a drone. And within 6 months, both sides are using it, and it's no longer kind of a new factor which can give one side or the other a distinct advantage. I think that with AI and political messaging, to the extent that it's effective, both sides are going to engage in it. I don't know if you guys remember just this election cycle, the partisan primaries here in South Carolina. There was some AI voice, speak and spell advertisements that made its way onto the South Carolina radio airwaves. No, I don't think those were very effective. I think they were done ham-handedly because folks were too cheap to hire voiceover artists. But it is, the slow creep of AI into political messaging that I think we're going to see in coming years. And yes, do I think it's insane to suggest it this nakedly in a Huffington Post op-ed? Like, yeah, the times aren't looking good if you have to suggest that the only way to make your candidate palatable is to produce a deep fake of them. But I do think it's going to happen either way. Now, would I have submitted that op-ed myself if I were a Democratic operative? No.
Jen Wood, let me ask you this. If you could type into that speak and spell and make virtual President Biden say anything, what would you make him say?
I'm going to step away and hand the reins over to somebody who's here.
Whoa. All right, let me ask you the follow-up question there, Jen. Who?
I don't know. That's the next. I honestly, I don't know. I'm not.
It has to be Harris.
I think it has to be, but I'm not necessarily a huge Kamala Harris fan. So
Nobody is.
I don't know what the answer is, but at some point,
she's the only person they can transfer every dollar they've already raised to. She will be an incumbent, assuming he does it early enough if he chooses to step down. So she'll get the incumbency advantage. She's a much stronger candidate against Donald Trump than Joe Biden ever could hope to be. But as you say, nobody's hoping that Kamala is the nominee.
I mean, can't we just start nominating people that aren't,
It's very interesting because if you think back to
years.
2016, the DNC had Bernie Sanders, who was very popular within their own party and who would have won in 2016 against Donald Trump, polls showed, and they foisted Hillary Clinton upon their own party. And of course, she got dashed against the rocks. In 2020, they, through COVID, were able to, and what they did with the election, were able to win. But now they have, weekend at Biden's here. And it's looking like they're about to put themselves in the same position again. And it's like the DNC is running against Trump, an eminently beatable candidate. And yet they seem to run candidates against him who are destined to lose. It's fascinating because they are so effective as a political organization once they have their hands on the levers of power. But the people that they choose to advance to try to get in that position oftentimes are not the ones who are going to get them there.
Yeah, no, that's true. And for some background, again, FITSNews, we've been following this stuff for a very long time. We've endorsed in several of the previous presidential elections. I want to point out, though, in 2020, we endorsed the Libertarian, Joe Jorgensen, Greenville, South Carolina's own, the Libertarian nominee for president. That was our endorsement back in 2020. But as we approach this thing, you talked about just a minute ago who would potentially replace Joe Biden in the event he were to either step down or be what's Epsteined or whatever the term is. Let me ask you this, Dylan. What do you think the odds are? Because you talked about this on one of our previous episodes on this very show. You talked about that this was going to happen at some point.
Months ago.
Right. Let me ask you this. What are the odds, Dylan Nolan, that on Election Day, November 5th of this year, what are the odds that Joe Biden is the Democratic nominee on Election Day?
It's a very interesting question because Joe Biden is, at the end of the day, the only person who can pull out, and it seems as though he's listening at this juncture to his wife and to his son, both of whom are advising him to stay in the race. It seems as though basically everybody else is advising him not to. So I don't know. Will he hold out? Will he be obstinate enough to make it to the end of the road, or will the Democratic donors kind of come together and have a meeting with the Biden family and say, look, we'll give you a book deal, $100 million, big old presidential library. You're going to be a hero at the convention, or we're going to remove you from office, via the constitutional mechanisms which allow us to do this. I think there is going to be that kind of backroom conversation.
Oh, wow.
So I think the odds that he makes it all the way, he's clearly shown he would have dropped out this week if he was on the fence. So he's
Right.
clearly shown his desire and his family's desire for him to stay in all the way. That's why I'm going to say it's still a 50-50, even though, and we haven't mentioned this, but he's dropped at this point at the time of recording 6 points is kind of the consensus number in national polling. And a number of states which were swing states are now in the lean Trump camp, and a number of states which were not swing states are now swing states. So it's dramatically impacted the polling as far as the horse race at the end of the day in November.
That's true, and we are still waiting on some of the aggregate polling data from those 6 or 7 battleground states that really are the ones that are going to decide this election. And again, not just those states, but the independent, undecided voters in those states, which is a very small universe to determine the destiny of more than 300 million people. I want to ask Jen this. Jen, you mentioned earlier, you said you would tell the artificial intelligence version of Joe Biden to stand aside and drop down. What do you think the chances are, though, that that actually happens?
I'm with Dylan, still 50-50. I think he's stubborn. I think he's got people in his ear telling him he can do this. I'm not sure where it's going to end up. I just don't see a candidate in him right now that is capable of running this country for 4 more years. I mean, I saw that debate, and I thought of him going into, meetings with, heads of state or making decisions, regarding national security. And I'm concerned. I'm sincerely concerned.
No, it's very frightening. You always worried about what they were typing in the teleprompter, but now it's, you worry a little bit more when you see just how frail, how confused this man truly appears to be. And again, not at all reassuring that literally days after this debate, Biden has a call with Democratic governors and tells them the solution: he's going to be getting more sleep and not scheduling anything after 8 p.m.
Yeah, because that's how the world works.
The leader of the free world, everybody. But again, count on FITSNews. Obviously, we have no hesitation to share our views on the political landscape, on what we see. But again, at our media outlet, the underlying primary principle is an open microphone, an open exchange of ideas. So we would encourage anyone who's got a take on Joe Biden, on Donald Trump, on the state of the race, and on whether they're bullish or bearish on America, please take advantage of that open microphone, because we're here not to shove our view down your throat, but to host a conversation in which all of us hopefully can get a little closer to the truth. Thanks, Jen and Dylan, for joining me on this segment, and keep it tuned to FITSNews for the very latest on the 2024 presidential election. It's been a while since we've had a good old-fashioned manhunt in South Carolina, but we had one this past week in the Palmetto upstate. FITSNews was at the tip of the spear, not only covering who the escapee was, but why it mattered and when they got caught. And the reporter who was on top of this from the beginning are Andy Fancher. Andy, you did the deep dive on this. It was amazing reading your article compared to everything else that was published.
Any other outlet's article.
Talk about digging deep on this guy. And it's important, too, because this was a bad hombre.
Right. I mean, as you stated here, I mean, we love a good old-fashioned manhunt, but this one checked all the boxes. I mean, it's got gang, guns, motorcycles, meth, negligent law enforcement, KKK affiliations, Hells Angels motorcycle gang affiliations, and on top of that, a fugitive wanted across 3 different states, and it all came to peak on July 4th in the backyard of the upstate, right here.
Under the glow of the fireworks.
Right.
Walk us through. Right. Tell us who this guy is, how to get loose.
Mm-hmm.
Give us the background on the subject of the man.
Sure, and I've been given express permission by certain members of our law enforcement community here to really go hard at the Carter County Sheriff's Office, and you don't even need to tell me once to point at some bad law enforcement.
That's for sure.
Which appears to be the case here in Carter County, Tennessee. So what we have is a trustee named Billy Reed Fletcher, 43, purported meth dealer of Butler, Tennessee. This man is known, intimately familiar with law enforcement out there. I mean, he has got multiple assault charges, kidnapping charge, domestic violence charge, dating from about 2006 to 2020, 2021. The whole reason he was incarcerated was because he broke his probation. So within 6 months of being incarcerated for breaking his probation relating to an attempted kidnapping of his spouse in 2017, he becomes a trustee of the Carter County Detention Center located on Carter County Sheriff's Office property. It's worth noting that the trustees, when they work outside, they're wearing blue jeans and a white t-shirt. They're not marked.
Wow.
And
So this is like a work release, like
is
on the side of the road.
on the side of the road, you know, raking leaves or washing police cruisers, what have you. So according to Carter County Sheriff Mike Fraley, he walked off property at about 7:07 a.m.
Up and left.
Up and left. Said, you know what, I'm done with this.
Catch y'all on the flip side.
Yeah, vanishes. That's it. Now, an exclusive detail that we're going to report for the first time here, there's a 61-year-old named Victor Birchfield who's leaving the Elizabethan Municipal Airport, last recorded 6:53 a.m. He's leaving the airport en route to home. The Elizabethan Airport is about 2 miles from the detention center, and Mr. Birchfield has got to pass by the detention center to get home.
He didn't make it, did he?
Didn't make it home. It took Carter County Sheriff's Office 11 hours to notice that their trustee was missing. 11 hours. Yet within that time frame, Victor Birchfield's daughter had already placed her father's vehicle in South Carolina the day that the trustee was reported missing. Granted, it took him 11 hours to find out.
Yeah.
He was already pinged in South Carolina. Victor Birchfield's daughter, Tiffany Cole, was watching transactions being placed throughout North Carolina until finally his card was declined in Clemson, South Carolina. His vehicle was ultimately abandoned in Pickens, which is where law enforcement found it days later.
Any trace of the victim?
No.
Oh, bad.
So at the time of our recording, it's been 15 days since her father vanished, since her father's vehicle was found here in South Carolina, along with, of course, the fugitive.
So
but
this story could get bad.
Absolutely. What confuses law enforcement as well as myself is that Fletcher was incarcerated for about 3 years. He was on a 3-year sentence, and he was about 6 months into it. Yet he has potentially racked up a very serious charge, as Victor Birchfield is unaccounted for, on top of escape, on top of transporting federal papers over state lines, which is what was in Birchfield's vehicle, as he is an airplane mechanic. He works with the FAA, former U.S. Army. His own clients have actually taken to the skies of Tennessee since his disappearance, looking over lakes, looking at areas where his vehicle pinned, purportedly by that point in time being operated by Fletcher.
At this point, we're holding out hope here. This is a rescue operation, not a recovery, right? Or what's your sense? What's your gut tell you?
So it's my understanding that after state law enforcement found his vehicle, which was long before they found the fugitive, they did contact Victor Birchfield's daughter and asked if she could provide anything with her father's DNA on it.
Oh, boy. That's never good.
She did tell me that she asked law enforcement, frankly, listen, I mean, is there blood in my father's forerunner? Is my father alive? And they spoke to her candidly and said, we honestly don't know. So here's my thinking. If Billy Fletcher, I mean, from what we know, he is a recorded meth dealer out in Butler, Tennessee. According to his own Facebook postings, he is a member of the KKK, and it took him a long time to earn his badge. He's a member of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. In fact, he has given props to the Greenville chapter of that organization. So if this man is burning crosses, riding motorcycles, and selling meth out in rural Tennessee, it's more likely than not he knows more than a few good places to toss a body, if that is what happened here. So
He's
I
a
don't.
menacing dude. You posted some messages from this guy that were straight rage.
God.
I mean, this guy's got some anger issues.
Oh, yes. And I mean, you know, if you go to his Facebook from about 2016 to 2018, around the same time, he appears to be a commercial truck driver. And, you know, he's working on motorcycles. He's very good in the garage. He's talking about how long it takes a pig to devour a body. He. Referring to women as the C word, referring to black people as that, you know, derogatory word. I mean, it's
classy guy.
It is no mistaking where this man stands. And this was the guy who Carter County Sheriff's Office said, yeah, he's trusty material.
Let's put him out on a work.
Put him out on work release.
Walk us through the apprehension, because these Greenville County guys, man, they have done an amazing job. This is a department that's been through a lot already this year. They've had canine shot in OIS. They've had several high-profile incidents already this year. They did a great job landing this guy. Walk us through the apprehension, Andy.
Sure. So the apprehension starts on June 24th, per se, because June 24th was the last known time that Fletcher was recorded in the Greenville area. All right.
Walmart or something, right?
Yeah, it was near White Horse Road, Walmart on White Horse Road. It's also worth noting that Fletcher had posted pictures of himself at a Long John Silver's on White Horse Road in 2016. So
He knows
again,
that area,
familiarity with the area. And even though he was recorded on the 24th, it took the Carter County Sheriff's Office 8 frickin' more days after that to say, you know what? Maybe he's connected to that guy that went missing 5 minutes from where he was last recorded. Took him 8 days to get to that point. So anyway, he was recorded on the 24th. SLED released those pictures of him wearing a Gamecocks uniform, and according to Birchfield's daughter, her father's prescription sunglasses, her father's sun hat, and her child's book bag that were all in her father's vehicle, recorded him at a hot spot wearing all of those items, and then that was it. I mean, without a trace. And it's safe to presume that SLED, that the Tennessee Bureau of Investigations, that Clemson PD, that every law enforcement from the top to low country of this state were checking under every bridge for this guy. And
it seemed they got close a few days before he was out.
Right. There was this magnificent display of force on the night of the 3rd, morning of the 3rd, morning of the 3rd. Yeah, right. We had, I believe there was SLED out there as well, GCSO with bullhorns calling for his name. And in fact, at that point in time, I had hopped onto the police scanner, and it was very interesting to just hear this whole search play out. You could hear the choppers playing up above, and it's quite humorous. Everybody was considered a suspect. You know, oh, we've got an Impala swerving over here. We got a lady standing on her balcony over here. Someone's got a joint. Book them. So everybody was a suspect leading up to his ultimate apprehension. And he was, as you noted in the very beginning, you know, caught under the bursts of fireworks on the 4th of July. It was apparently a tip to SLED of his appearance in that area. Why he'd stick around for over a week in the same area he was last recorded. I mean, Carter County Sheriff's Office handed this man a 14-day head start, you know? And he didn't seem to do much with it. So we never said that this was a criminal who shopped at Joseph A. Banks, so I guess we shouldn't be too surprised.
Well, Andy, they didn't have to give you permission to go after those guys. They don't have to ask you twice, like you said.
Well, I mean, just look at the timeline. If you look at the timeline. So apparently at Carter County Sheriff's Office, the people who handle missing persons and the people who handle missing inmates are two different departments that share a same wall.
Where's the media in Tennessee on this? Don't we have, Dylan was telling me we got some Tennessee media that are
well, sure. I mean, there's
on the case,
MSM everywhere.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what they are, mainstream media.
They're to jump on that.
They're going to give you 1 to 2 sentence write-ups. And that's not to say that Tiffany Cole, Victor Birchfield's daughter, has not been reached out to by other outlets out there. And it's not to say that MSM's help in speaking with her did not bring more exposure to this case and lead to this man's subsequent apprehension.
Law enforcement agencies in Tennessee accountable, because that's what.
You're happens. Saying MSM hold law enforcement accountable? That's a cute wish.
Well, we do it.
It seems to be we're the only people that do it. I don't know why it's so hard to say, hey, look, here's an officer who strangled his wife. Maybe let's blast his mugshot. I don't know why that's so much to ask.
You're teasing the future report here, aren't you?
Yes, as you're familiar. But I don't know why it's so much to ask that the fourth pillar of democracy perhaps hold the law enforcers as accountable as they hold us. That shouldn't be too much to ask.
Well, it shouldn't be. Unfortunately, in too many places it is. But folks, Andy Fancher not only covering every aspect of this manhunt, but also, more importantly, if you follow FITSNews, if you haven't read his stuff, more importantly, holding the law enforcement agencies accountable. I think our guys in South Carolina did a pretty good job this time.
You know what?
Grudgingly.
What was that one tweet? We give him 5 felon stars. So you know what? How about this? I'll give him 5 GTA stars.
Hey, there you go.
There you go.
We'll take it. Folks, Andy Fancher, for the very latest on what's happening in crime and courts in South Carolina, you got to follow his reporting. And once again, not just the details of these cases, but also keeping the microscope on our law enforcement agencies to make sure they are living up to their sworn obligation to you. Thanks, Andy. So pivoting from violent criminals to the folks who are supposed to hold them accountable, I'm joined now by Dylan Nolan to talk about an issue that has been at the forefront of our agenda anyway for years now. Certainly since you've been on board with us, Dylan Nolan, judicial reform, fixing the way South Carolina selects its judges. It's been notoriously corrupt for years. There was some progress this year. You've been covering it extensively, filed a big report this week. Dylan, walk us through the latest judicial reform bill.
Yeah, just kind of taking the 10,000-foot view here. I would say you asked a couple of years ago whether the General Assembly would address judicial reform at all. You probably would have put the likelihood of that happening within the next 18 months at a fat 0%. So, first of all, the fact that this was an issue at all that became a part of the mainstream political dialogue and, not just something that fools like ourselves are talking about sitting in an office, that was kind of miraculous. But this issue got taken up because there was a significant amount of public pressure generated, mostly through media press like we're doing. I think Bowen Turner, the infamous thrice accused teenage rapist out of Orangeburg, South Carolina, had a lot to do with that because he was represented by a powerful state senator in court. But the issue did come to the forefront, did come to the table. And another thing that I think helped a lot was the fact that Governor Henry McMaster was behind it, because what we have right now in South Carolina is a situation in which the legislative branch of government has an inordinate amount of power and control over the judicial branch of government, because they both screen and select who is allowed to run for judge and then themselves have an election for who's going to sit on the bench. And
we put it charitably there. They run the judicial branch. Let's make no bones about it. But go ahead.
Yes, they also set their budgets. So the judicial branch really is not operating in a separation of powers like you would think under the very basic school civics way of thinking. The legislative branch has an inordinate amount of control over the judicial branch in this state, and that's something that a lot of people were seeking to change, especially people that operate in the executive branch of government, that being the solicitors, that being Attorney General Alan Wilson, that being the governor, all of whom say the executive branch should have some level of say. Now, when it comes to a reform conversation in South Carolina, the first question immediately, on the tree of which way we could go here is, do we go for a constitutional amendment which would completely change the way that circuit court judges in South Carolina are picked, or do we modify the existing system? And the existing system is the system which affords the legislature all the power which we're speaking about. And ultimately, legislative leaders opted to modify that system instead of completely implementing a new system which would really reapportion power. So
they preserved their authority over,
this conversation that we're having about what eventually ended up getting implemented all falls under the umbrella of, okay, they made the decision at the beginning of the process, we're not going to make these major modifications to the constitutional structure of the state. So everything that we talk about, following that, you have to understand they're tinkering around the edges effectively.
Yeah. Well, and It's interesting because we talked about this in the office. We talked about you were covering this issue. Obviously, we'd covered it
For months.
many times for months. But we talked about you were going to cover this final bill. I was thinking of hopping in on the back end with kind of a nut punch op-ed. But the governor came in and kind of delivered the nut punch himself, didn't he?
Right. You used to work for Governor Mark Sanford. You were doing communications for him. And I'll tell you what, it felt to me reading Henry McMaster's press release here, like you were working for the governor once again. It could have been something coming out of your mouth. It was so strongly worded.
Yeah, he was very aggressive. Did it surprise you to see Henry McMaster, who's, again, a very kind of cautious status
Milquetoast politician? I was very happy to see him weighing in this heavily because, as you say, it is rare that McMaster is actually substantively taking policy positions that are inconvenient for the GOP supermajority in this state. It's just not something you see happening every day. And let's get into the reasons. First let's say, what did they do? Because even McMaster says they did some good things here.
Yeah.
So keeping in mind that, these are all kind of tinkering around the edges changes, well, they did make some good modifications. The JMSC, which is the panel that screens these judges, which in the past they have been, I think, with good evidence, accused of rigging judicial elections. They've done some things institutionally to make that more difficult, such as giving the governor a handful of appointments to who sits on that board, as well as making sure that the folks who sit on that are rotating out over the years so that these judges don't have to be screened by the same legislators year after year, meaning that if these legislators who are attorneys appear before them, they're going to feel beholden to them because they know, all right, next time I'm up asking for my job back, it's going to be in front of the attorney who is in my court right now.
They've got to live stream their meetings too as well, and also they broaden the number of candidates that can be sent to a legislative vote.
It was 3, which was really problematic because the folks in the JMSC would frequently use that cap of 3 to have 1 preferred candidate and 2 weak candidates, and then they would kind of bully other strong candidates into dropping out. So with this cap of 6, what that means is their ability to have 1 true candidate and 2 basically fake ones, it's going to be dramatically reduced. Now, knowing the folks that sit on that panel, they're going to find new ways to exert power and political influence, but it will at least be more difficult.
Water flows downstream, doesn't it? Let me ask you this, Dylan. You spoke with a lot of different folks that have been really leading this effort. Because, we like to say, okay, FITSNews has been driving this debate, and we have. We've been playing.
We certainly show people the flaws of the system when they occur, and unfortunately have grave human costs. We will have the victims of that system come sit in these chairs and share their story, which I think was a big part of pushing it. But as you say, it was the politicians at the end of the day who are the players on the field.
Yeah, and you spoke with a lot of them. That's what I wanted to ask you. You talked to Joe White, who was the architect of the judicial reform movement in the South Carolina House. You spoke to Solicitor David Pasco, who, along with Kevin Brackett up in York County, has been instrumental in driving this issue publicly. What was their feedback on the bill that ultimately was signed into law by the governor?
It was interesting because it's universal. Very happy that something has passed, but also nobody's willing to concede, at least the folks who are pushing for this legislation, that it is anything more than small changes, which, Solicitor Pasco in his statement to me was very clear. This is change for the sake of change to preserve the status quo, as he put it. Meaning, you throw a bone, but really that bone doesn't actually, if you think about things in a larger context, mean anything.
Well, and speaking of the status quo, you also spoke to the chairman of this panel.
I spoke to the chairman of the JMSC, Micah Caskey. He's fairly new to the General Assembly. He's been there for a while now, but definitely not OG legislative leadership. That being said, he's an attorney based in the Midlands. He was actually formerly my representative, which is how I got to know him as his constituent. I focused on him a lot more. But he is leading this panel, and so, of course, he was advocating for the changes which they implemented. He emphasized that they did not throw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't know how much bathwater they threw out, but I respect him for sharing his opinion with me. And it's very interesting because his statement definitely needles the Senate and the governor by saying, all right, well, now that we've done judicial reform, let's focus on magistrate reform. And while I don't know that I agree personally with Caskey's sentiment that magistrate reform, judicial reform's done, let's move on to magistrate reform, I do think there's definitely a conversation to be had about both probate and magistrate court reforms in South Carolina. Probate courts here are historically prone to fraud, and magistrate courts right now are appointed with the advice and appointed by the governor with the advice and consent of the Senate, and everybody knows who's involved in that process, that it is a heavily politicized process. But it was very interesting to see House leadership acolyte Caskey kind of needling the executive branch and needling the Senate there.
Well, you said advice and consent of the Senate, but everybody knows it is the local delegations that pick.
Right. The actual effective situation on the ground here is that the Senate delegations will make their pick, and the governor, unless they're nominating Mussolini, is going to approve it.
Well, Dylan, where does this debate go from here? Obviously, you spoke with a lot of folks this week as you wrote that article on the passage of this law and the signing of this bill. Are we going to see additional judicial reform pushes in the coming legislative sessions, in your estimation?
All the folks that were pushing for it last time seem to still be on the field. I don't know how many allies additional judicial reform has in the Senate, but it certainly has some folks who are willing to push in the House. It certainly has folks in the executive branch who will likely be willing to push farther. So we'll see. I didn't predict this issue would be anything that we were talking about actually having something signed into law within the next 5 years at all. So you never know what the future holds on something like this.
No, that's true. Well, you count on FITSNews, folks. We have been, again, leading the discussion on this issue for several years, highlighting not only the stories of the victims, but also the advocates in and out of the political process that have been fighting to make the way we pick judges in South Carolina fairer and make the outcomes of our system fairer to the citizens of this state. We will continue to do that. We will continue to push for real judicial reform. And while the governor did weigh in on it, I'm also going to weigh in on, again, what I have long argued is the real fix here. Stay tuned for that editorial coming this week on FITSNews. Thanks, Dylan, for your work on this.
Thanks, sir.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for this week's edition. Once again, I want to thank Andy, Dylan, and Jen for the incredible work they've done, not just on this show, but the whole time I was gone. Cannot thank them enough for holding the fort down. Also, though, want to thank each and every one of you for tuning into these episodes. It is your support that makes everything we do here possible, from the political analysis, the true crime coverage, to those focus on those core institutional political issues. Your support enables everything we do here at FITSNews. So if you haven't already, please consider going to FITSNews.com and subscribing. Only $8 a month. And again, it empowers all the work we do to hold those in power accountable. We'll catch you next time on The Week in Review.